All right, folks, if you're just joining us, we're just going to wait 30 seconds or so to let everybody get into the session this evening before we begin. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited about this evening's presentation.
I'm Dora Fay, and I want to welcome everybody too. Get comfortable. This is going to be historical and a learning opportunity about agency here in West Seattle. Thanks for being here.
So it looks like we've got just about everybody in, so we should get started. And again, thanks for joining us this evening. My name's Michael King. I'm the Executive Director of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's presentation, our fourth presentation this year in the Words, Writers, and Southwest Stories speaker series. Tonight we're going to be exploring a subject matter that's especially relevant to our service area, and again, we're really looking forward to it. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Southwest Seattle Historical Society and our Log House Museum are located on the traditional land of the Duwamish people, past and present, and we are grateful to the Duwamish people for stewarding this land throughout the generations. Again, we're thrilled to be joined by this evening's presenter, who's going to be introduced momentarily, and we're also incredibly grateful to our sponsors who make this evening's program possible. In particular, we'd like to thank the Seattle Public Library, For Culture, Luna Park Cafe, Duwamish Tribal Services, and Home Street Bank. The Historical Society's mission is to promote local heritage through education, preservation, and advocacy. And tonight's presentation is one of a wide range of programs and initiatives that we host and share with our community to realize our mission. We can't host and create these free experiences without the support of our community and without the support of you. So if you're inspired by what you hear this evening and you'd like to support our programming, I'd encourage you to make a donation or to join the Historical Society as a member. Equally importantly, given our subject matter this evening, I'd also encourage you to support the good work of the West Seattle Food Bank. And I'm going to post a link to the Food Bank's website in the chat function momentarily so you can explore the good work that they're doing in our community today. I know many of you have joined these sessions before and are familiar with our format, but if you're joining us for the first time this evening, I just want to let you know that we're going to utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen this evening. If you have a question for our speaker tonight, please type it into the Q&A function and our moderator will pose the question on your behalf to our speaker this evening. With all that said, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Dora Fay Hendricks. Dora Fay is a board member here at the Historical Society, and she is the chair of the Words, Writers, and Southwest Stories speaker series. Dora Fay, it's all yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you again, everybody, for being here. Tonight, Ron Marshall will be presenting his latest book entitled Hunger Immortal, the First 30 Years of the West Seattle Food Bank, which now includes their fairly new partner, Helpline. Ron has served on the West Seattle Food Bank since 1996. He's past president of the West Seattle Ministerial Association and has served on the board of Music Northwest for over 25 years. He's been the pastor of First Lutheran Church of West Seattle since 1979. Ron was raised in Tacoma and graduated from Stadium High School in '67, where he was elected boy most likely to succeed in his senior class, had perfect attendance, and was a top student in his class. He graduated in philosophy from Washington State University in 1971, magna cum laude, and was elected to Phi Beta Kappa. He and his wife Jane were married in '72 and have 3 grown children, all graduates of Garfield High School and alumni of the high school orchestra program. Ron is the author of 2 books on the religious thoughts of Martin Luther King and Soren Kierkegaard. I hope I didn't ruin his name, Ron. He's also well known for his unique ongoing class on the Quran, which he's been teaching 4 times a year since 2003. Now 30 years have passed since the West Seattle Food Bank was started, and that story is finally being told for the first time. We're recording this program too, so it can be used again. All proceeds from the sale of his book, this book, will go to support the mission of the food bank. By purchasing copies of this book for yourself, family, and friends, you not only will get in on a wonderful part of history of the West Seattle community, but also support the food bank and help your neighbors in need. If you're motivated to buy Ron's book, we suggest you to buy the book from our local paper boat booksellers, 6040 California Avenue in West Seattle, a business friend of the Historical Society. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ron Marshall.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, and welcome everyone tonight. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to have an opportunity to think about a wonderful nonprofit in West Seattle, which is the West Seattle Food Bank. It celebrated its 30th anniversary now about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And the book came out in 2013. And I'm now going to give you a little presentation based on the book. So we have a series of slides here about the book in a PowerPoint presentation. And feel free to ask questions along the way. And as questions come in, I will respond to them rather than waiting till the end. So the West Seattle Food Bank's on the corner of 35th and Morgan Street in West Seattle. And its 30th anniversary was in 2013, and that's when the book came out. And there were 4 reasons for writing the book. The first one is that we weren't clear when the food bank had started, and that was because the early records of the food bank were not retained. And even though I was able to interview people who were the founders of the food bank, they couldn't remember exactly when it started. So that was one of the puzzles trying to figure out. We had had 2 dates that had been used. One was 1981 and the other was 1983. And so I tried to do some work to discover when it was actually found, which was in 83. And then we weren't sure where all the locations were. We knew that it had many locations, but we didn't know where they all were. So that was another part of the story. But the one that animated me, and I'm not sure I would have worked on the book if it weren't for this third one. And that's the story about this West Seattle resident named Earl Vick, who upon his death in December of 1996, gave his entire estate to the West Seattle Food Bank. He had never donated to the West Seattle Food Bank. He had never used the services of the West Seattle Food Bank. And he gave the whole estate to the West Seattle Food Bank. So when we found out about that in the spring of 97, we were shocked. It's a tremendous amount of money came in, $335,000 it turned out to be. And why did this man do it? So that was one of the projects. And then the fourth question was, when we eventually were able to build our own food bank that opened in 2007 on the corner now of 35th and Morgan, we were able to secure a piece of property well below the market value. And we had been looking around for property for a couple years, and they were all very, very expensive. And it didn't look like we were going to be able to use our endowment to be able to build a permanent home for the West Seattle Food Bank so that our services could be more reliably provided for our clients. You know, rather than moving around all the time, they were having a hard time keeping a track of where we were to distribute the food. So if we could have a permanent home, this was a very important thing for us. And it looked like we weren't going to be able to do it even with this $335,000. And then out of the blue, we find out about this piece of property where we currently are. And the family did not have it on the market, but they sold it to us well below the value of the property. And we wanted to find out why they did that. We did not know that family. We didn't have any connections with them. So those were the 4 reasons why I wrote, why I got busy on the book. And I became obsessed with the story. I just became obsessed with it and worked on it for 3 years while holding down my full-time job. So I was burning the candle at both ends about this story. And there it is, our wonderful building on the corner of 35th and Morgan, opened in May of 2007. And when you walk into that building, it's natural to wonder, how did it get here? Who paid for this? Whose idea was this? How was it done? So those are some of the questions I wanted to answer as well. So it's one of our former board members. I love this picture. Isn't it beautiful? All the wonderful food that we're able to give out. We give out a lot of fresh food. It's really a great, great food bank. And now we're helping, I think, over 1,000 families every week. It's hard to keep track of it all, but I think that's about what it is. It does a great service in our community. And it all began down on the corner of Morgan Street and California Avenue. So you know where that Starbucks there and Zeke's Pizza is. So if you're on the side where Starbucks is and just go a couple spots, properties south of the Starbucks, there's an Ivy Court apartment, and that's where this house was. And it was at this house where the predecessor to the West Seattle Food Bank began back in 1980, a guy named Mankey. And he had an independent Christian evangelism program that included giving away food. And as it turned out, he was a crook. And so the whole thing collapsed. And when it collapsed, after being in operation about 3 or 4 years, one of the volunteers there was asked if she could continue it. And she did, and she became she and her husband became the founders of the food bank in 1983. Now, what happened was, when Mankey set this up, it was a distribution of government commodities, peanut butter, butter, and gee, I'm forgetting what the third one was, but it was cheese. So it was peanut butter, butter, and cheese. And that's basically what he distributed. Now, there was another food bank in West Seattle at the time that had started in 1970, when there was that huge layoff at Boeing. And there was a famous billboard, last one out, turn out the lights. There were a lot of food banks that cropped up then, and one was in West Seattle. And it started in 1970. But it was very much inspired by civic activists from the 60s. And they weren't interested at all in any governmental support. They wanted to be completely independent of the government because of what had gone on in the 60s. And so there were no distribution points for government commodities in West Seattle because that food bank wouldn't cooperate with the government. So Mankey walked into a vacuum, got the commodities, and he ended up using the money to buy alcohol and spread that around. And he had a clandestine alcohol business going on, and that's how the whole thing collapsed. But that's how he got started. And so our food bank began on the ruins of an immoral food distribution center in that house. And when I was working on the book, I walked around the neighborhood and asked people if they knew about Mankey. And they said, yeah, and they didn't want to talk about him. Didn't like him at all. There he is, Floyd Mankey. Had been running a government commodities distribution center there. They gave out cheese, butter, and peanut butter for about 2 years. Lois Kahn volunteered to help, but was not happy by what she saw. She could tell just from the operations on keeping track of what was coming in and what was going out, that there was something suspicious about it. They had moved to West Seattle from South Dakota, where they'd had a family grocery store. So they had some sense of how food distribution works. And she knew there was something shady about it. And there she is, Lois and her husband, Bud, or Paul Cohn. Lois ended up talking to the officers of the then Mayor Charlie Royer and then Governor John Spellman, and learned that Mankey's operation had to close or there'd be a lawsuit. They encouraged Lois to take over the operation, and she gladly did. And so she actually started distributing it out of their backyard, which was about 4 blocks up Morgan Street toward 35th Avenue on 40th Street. So I guess it'd be 3 blocks or so. And they were there for a very short time. And then Royer's office and Spellman's office helped them get into this building, the grand and glorious Jefferson School, where currently Safeway sits and Bartell's Drugs in Jefferson Square. That's why it's called Jefferson Square, after the Jefferson School. What a stately, grand building. Built in 1912, many, many loyal alumni from that school, residents of West Seattle. It closed in '79 because of not enough students. And there were repairs that needed to be done, and they didn't want to invest the money. So the building was sitting there empty when it was time for the West Seattle Food Bank, called the Junction Emergency Food Bank at the time, to open. And so Spellman and Royer found a place in the basement of that building. And that's where the first home was, outside of Lois and Bud Cohn's home. And down in the basement, there had been a bomb shelter down there that had a bunch of jelly beans in it to satisfy people as they were waiting out the nuclear holocaust. And so they would use those jelly beans to give people a little treat when they would come in to get their food. So Paul also mentioned that the water, of course, had been turned off, but the commodes were still in place and the sewer still worked, but there was no water. So every day when he would come on Fridays, they distribute the food. Every Friday he'd come with a couple buckets of water in case any of the clients need to use the bathroom. And then he'd run up there and he'd put the water in the tank and then tell they could use it. So when the water ran out of the buckets, then there was no more use of the bathroom. So it was an interesting situation. Now, the building was torn down in '85, and so then the food bank had to move. But before it was torn down, some of you listening tonight, if Clay Eels is in the group, he was very much involved in trying to save this building. And he's a treasure of West Seattle for us. So anyway, Clay worked hard but failed. He had a lot of signatures trying to save it. And so what they did then toward the end of it, before they tore it down, was they allowed people from the West Seattle community to come in and take mementos from the building. Now, I was not a graduate of the Jefferson School, but I admired it so much. And I just, isn't it a stately building? And I knew how much people loved it. So I actually went up there and wandered around the building looking for something to take. And it had been pretty well picked over by the time I got there. And all the brass fixture work, I think the city got most of the brass fixture work on the big doors. And there were desks in there, all kinds of stuff. I think people ended up getting some bricks too from that building. But I got a door. Man, these were big doors, you know, like maybe 4 by 7 feet, big doors. It had no hinges and it had no doorknob on it. But I got my door and I walked home with my door because we're 6 blocks from the junction, north of the junction. And well, that was not popular, bringing that big door home to my family. What are you doing? Bringing this big door home? I said, I don't know, but it's a historic door. They said, Dad, get a grip, get a grip. And I said, I want the door. So I managed to wedge it down through the stairs into our basement and found a wall there. I could line it up and put other things in front of it because I knew that my family worried about me taking up precious space in our basement. So anyway, I got the door down there in '84, '85. And there it sat until 2014. Much complaining about that door in the basement. But finally, I realized why I had the door. When we opened our new food bank on 35th and Morgan Street, there was a perfect place in the entryway of the food bank where it could be mounted on the wall as a memento from the first place where the food bank operated. And we could put a couple pictures on it and a plaque. So in 2014, I twisted the arm of my good friend at the church here, Daryl Korsmo, and he mounted it on the wall. And there's the door in the entryway of the food bank. And you see Bud and Lois's picture at the top, and then Earl Vick is out at the bottom, and we'll be talking more about that picture. And then the plaque on it reads, "This door is from the old Jefferson School. where our food bank was first located from 1983 to 1985. The school opened in 1912, where Jefferson Square now is in the Alaska Junction, closed in 1979 and torn down in 1985. And notice that the door has a doorknob on it. But I told you the doorknobs are all taken off. Well, my friend Dale, who mounted the door for me, longtime member of our church here, he found kind of an antique doorknob. He was telling me just the other day where he found that. I think his brother-in-law helped him find it. And didn't he do a nice job matching it? It almost looks like it's original. So when we had to move out of the Jefferson school building, where are we going to go? And that's when we started becoming known as the Nomadic Food Bank. Where is the food? It's like looking for Waldo. Where's the food bank today? Because we weren't able to stay in our locations much. It's interesting that these three next sites were all up and down California Avenue, if you can believe it. The chances now of something like that happen are remote, since the property on California Avenue is so expensive. But the second site was very close. It's where Rasmussen's chiropractic is. That's the Rasmussen Chiropractic building, which is just a block south of my church, First Lutheran Church of West Seattle. And that's where he rented it out to us for a short while there. But wherever the food bank was in the neighborhoods, there was always complaints from the neighbors because of problem with the garbage and the rats and problems with the clients. Some of the clients didn't appear to be such upstanding citizens. And so there were complaints. And so we often then would lose our spot. And then the next site, there's 6041. So it's closer down to Morgan Street on the west side. And that's a picture of the building now where we were. Of course, it didn't have that nice facade on it when we were there for a short while. And then we moved back up north to, it's a construction shop now, and the name escapes me, but it's in the book. And that's where we were. And that we got involved in with Ron Turner Real Estate. He was the one who rented it to us. And if you know the history of Ron Turner's real estate company, it was all embroiled in fraud. And fortunately, none of that rubbed off on us, but we were having some of the difficulties that he had because he was not tending to our property very well. So we really needed to get out of that place. And I think Ron Turner ended up in jail for a while. So that was a bit of a dicey experience for the food bank. And it was during this time that we became incorporated. The Junction Food Bank was incorporated as a nonprofit on December 15th, 1988. Joanne Morris was the director. And that was after Lois and Bud Kahn left. So she was the second director. And Candace Lean Hayes, a board member, helped sign the papers, raise the money to get the nonprofit status for the food bank. Other board members at the time were Ann Vertrees, which you're going to hear more about. She is a very important person in the history of the food bank. Janice Johnson, who I think was Candace's sister, is Candace's sister. Mary Chapman, longtime volunteer at the food bank, and Aaron Flory. Unfortunately, the archives of the food bank are incomplete. The oldest financial report is a partial one from 1989. And I talked to a number of board members that were there earlier, talked to the directors, and nobody kept any kind of records. So that was very disappointing. So we ended up moving to where Budget Blinds is now. And this was fortuitous. This was a very important move. So Budget Blinds is right close to the West Seattle Bridge opening on Alaska. And Budget Blinds, at the time, it was available for rent, and it was owned by Ed and Mary North. Now, you should recognize that name because they owned a travel agency on Alaska Street off of Fauntleroy, close to the fire station, right across the street from the VFW. So they're still in operation. their children run it. And Ed and Mary North rented to us probably for nearly 20 years. So can you imagine how important this was? Because you remember, we're the Nomadic food bank. People were wondering, like looking for Waldo. Where are we going to get the food? Where's the food bank now? We were going up and down, back and forth on California Avenue. So we finally found this place, and Ed and Mary North secured the rental agreements and the leases with us. And more than that, they defended the food bank against angry neighbors who thought the food bank was bad for the neighborhood. 20 years. These two people were saints. Now, I know there were some problems with them because of keeping the building up. We had some trouble there, but they never flagged. They never failed on defending the food bank. And it was the same two complaints, the garbage and the rats and the clientele. People complained about the clientele. But Ed and Mary North stood by us, stood by us. Now, we were there in 97 when we got the news that we were rich. We had $335,000 given to us. So the first thing we thought, we were going to buy the building from Ed and Mary North, but they did not want to sell it because it was one of their first pieces of property and it was dear to them. So they would not sell it. So that took away the easy answer to what we could do about finding stability of location so that service to our clients is more reliable. And so then the search went on, trying to find a place to move. Now, just keep the math and the arithmetic in mind here. Earl Vick dies in December of 96. He lives up the street from the food bank, up on Dakota and 40th Street. That's where he lived. He was out shoveling snow off his sidewalk in December, had a heart attack and dropped dead in the snow. Neighbors found him. He was very much a curmudgeon. He was not well liked at all. He had no family members. All of his family were dead and gone. His parents were Norwegian immigrants, and there was no family around. And then when the news came out in February of 97 that we had all this money, it was a big surprise, as I had mentioned to you. But from 97 then to 2007 in May, when the food bank opened, 10 years, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. And we were looking for a permanent home. It took us 10 years to figure this all out. And of course, it was a very successful 10 years, as it turned out. During those 10 years, there were many times when we thought the whole thing was off. It would, and I recount those in the book. There were a number of really disappointing episodes in the development of the building that looked like it was off. And it kept rising up out of the ashes, one miracle after another. It was like it was destined to be where it is today.
Ron?
Yes.
Ron, we have a couple of questions for you.
Yes, please.
To the people you were talking about coming to the food bank, you found that neighbors who were have you found that neighbors who were initially reluctant to welcome the food bank to the neighborhood eventually changed their minds and attitudes? And for those that did, do you have a sense of what compelled them to do so?
Well, I don't have a lot of information on that, but I can say yes. And Fran Yates, who is our current executive director and was very much involved in this, as you're going to learn in a minute, she may have more information on that than I do, but I do know of some that did change their mind, and it was because of the compassion of the food bank and the dedication of the volunteers, that they cared so much for the clients that I think it became infectious for some people. And so they wanted to be a part of this this good deed that was being done.
Yeah, that's great. Another question about good people and being committed to this cause. Where did historically, where did they first get the money for the foods, the cheese, the peanut butter? Who donated that, or where did the money come from?
Okay, the the butter, the peanut butter, and the cheese were government commodities. So they were
Okay.
provided by a federal agency.
Okay.
And then there were other donations as well. And their story is told in the book about that. And that's where Holy Rosary, a Roman Catholic Church, plays a big, big part in the early years, because they were doing the food recovery program from Safeway up in the Admiral District, but they were having trouble with distribution times. And so Paul and Lois talked to, I think it was Sister Ann at Holy Rosary Church, and they decided to go together so that then the food bank, the Junction Emergency Food Bank, first name at the Jefferson School, was able to recover food from Safeway up on Admiral as well. And so that was a big influx of food. And then there were some individual donations, but not a lot, because the food bank wasn't that well known, because the food bank that was well known was the other one, you know, that was called the West Seattle Food Bank, that started in 1970. And it was the one up at High Point on Holly Street. Some of you may remember it there. And when that food bank closed, there was a lot of scandal about that too, because there had been malfeasance. And so it was in the news. So some people may remember that. I think that was back in 95 that happened. And then when that food bank closed, then shortly thereafter, the Junction Food Bank, which changed the name to the Junction Food Bank then, because of course it was in the Alaska Junction. That's why it was named that.
Yeah.
But then of course it wasn't in the Alaska Junction anymore. So they took the name of the West Seattle Food Bank then, after the first West Seattle Food Bank closed. It's a little confusing, but anyway, that's how that'll happen.
Very interesting. Thank you. We'll ask more later.
Okay. So anyway, 10 years. Now, when the money came in February of 97, I remember this like it happened yesterday. We're at the board meeting, and it was like the tale of two cities. It was the best of times and the worst of times. We're sitting here with this $335,000. I mean, we were just thrilled, because fundraising was always a problem for us in the early years. But we were scared to death that if people knew we had $335,000, nobody else would give any money to the food bank, because they figured we were fat cats. So we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Shall we announce to the community that we've received this grant, or shall we sit on it? And we talked about the pluses and minuses of both options. And the board meetings were long, and sometimes they were contentious. People say, we have to tell the people. Others say, if you tell the people, we're going to ruin our service to our clients. You can't tell the people we have all this money. So finally, a year later, and this is documented in the book, we finally put a little announcement in the West Seattle Herald, at the time it was called, our local newspaper, that we'd received this grant from Earl Vick. And we asked if anybody knew about Earl Vick, because we didn't have a clue who he was or why he gave us. And you know what happened? More money started coming in. What do you think of that? I mean, the board was shocked. We were shocked, because we thought for sure that any kind of fundraising efforts that we made would be deep sixed, but they weren't. People were excited. They knew the West Seattle Food Bank was here to stay if it had that kind of an endowment. And maybe if it got lucky, it would have a permanent location one day. And so the money started rolling in, and it surprised everybody. So the people on the board who said it was the moral thing to do, to tell the community, you can't hide this from the community, they felt that the moral high ground won, because we were rewarded with sustained fundraising. So anyway, Ed and Mary North are champions. And here's our friend, Earl Vick, as a boy. Now, at this time in the early 90s, a miracle happened. A West Seattle recluse janitor, he worked at the Terminal 1 building, downtown Seattle, he was a janitor, put the food bank into his will, leaving $335,000 at his death in 1996. So what are we going to do? How would you find out about this guy? You're starting to write the book. I started thinking about the book in 2009, and I talked to Fran Yates, our current executive director, about the project, and Fran was very supportive of it. even though she knew it was going to be some additional work for herself, who she's completely absorbed and obsessed with the moment, right? Helping people right now. So to shift gears and think about what happened 30 years ago, you know, it just amazed me that she was so willing to do that. And so she supported me all the way along in those efforts. So, so by the time I started writing it, he had been dead for the better part of 10 years, right? And he had no family. So what are you going to do? So one of the board members, Maris Umalis, who was the board president at the time, who was one of the first into the building, the house, when we found out that we were given this house. And then Maris was involved in the selling of the house, which was where we got most of the money. There was some money in stocks, and we have the whole estate delineated in the book. So you can see all the details of the estate on how it was distributed. But Maris remembered who the executor of the will was and who the attorney was. So now I get my first contacts for Earl Vick. So I contacted the attorney. The attorney didn't really have much help for me, but he really encouraged me to talk to the executor of the will, who lived up in Linden at the time, Alan Blasma. So I called Alan out of the blue, told him who I was, what I was up to. And he was chatty Cathy. He said, "Oh, I want to tell the story about Earl Vick. What a tragic, interesting story." So I tell you, I hit gold when I met Alan. And Alan and I talked and talked for hours and hours. He filled me in on Earl Vick and all the mysteries about him. And I remember when he finally, I wanted a picture of him so desperately. There were no existent pictures of him. He said he had been in his house many times. There were no pictures of him, no family pictures, nothing. If you can believe it, there was a picture of Joseph Stalin on the wall. That was the only picture he had in the house. Why he had a picture of Joseph Stalin on the wall is another question. And a bunch of other weird things that were found in the house. But the one adult picture that he had was on his driver's license. And Alan had the driver's license. And he had it in a storage box. And the basement had flooded and it ruined the picture. So the one picture of him as an adult was lost. So then Alan says, but of course the Department of Motor Vehicles has the original. So check with them and see if you can get a copy of it. So that began 4 months of discussing with the Department of Motor Vehicles about getting his picture, and they would never release it because of identity theft. And I said, I'll sign affidavits. I'll do anything you want. This is an innocent little food bank history book. We just want to picture this guy because he gave so much money that enabled us to build our building. No, no, no. I checked with representatives. I tried every angle. I could not get that picture. I mean, it was like getting into Fort Knox. And then Alan said, there is one other picture of him as a boy. And you know, Earl was a baby face. So he always looked like the boy. So he said, if you have the boy, picture of him as a boy, then that's really close. So the picture was fractured and he gave it to me. And Sonia Clementi at our church, our office manager, she helped me with the book, and she was able to Photoshop a lot of these things, and she did a great restoration job on that picture, don't you think? And there's a full page of it in the history book about him. But he was a troubled little boy. He ended up in reform school. He was locked up for a year for stealing stuff out of a grocery store. And he had trouble with alcohol. He had a police record from driving intoxicated that I found in the Seattle Times. And he was a very troubled man. His neighbors all hated him up there on that block on 40th and Dakota. But you remember I mentioned Ann Voorhees. Do you remember her? She was the treasurer of the food bank, and she was Earl Vick's neighbor. And they had this wonderful little dog that they loved for their son. And Earl Vick couldn't stand that dog because of all the barking. And Ann is convinced that Earl poisoned some raw meat and threw it over the fence and killed the dog. but she can't prove it. She could never prove it. And when she talked to Earl, as everybody would say, he'd always look at his feet. He never made eye contact with anybody. And he would mumble. So he seemed to be a very troubled person and a very isolated person. And when they, by the way, when they went into the house, they found in his room a whole bunch of maps of Boeing Field that he could see from his, there's a veranda looking south on that property. And he had all kinds of lines drawn in there for flight patterns. So some people thought maybe he was a spy or something, you know, but we just don't know. And then of course, with the picture of Joseph Stalin on the wall, how weird is that? And in his bedroom, they found a whole bunch of women's silk stockings of all different sizes in their original packages. There were a whole bureau drawer, a whole bureau filled with them, like 4 drawers. And nobody could figure out what those were there. And somebody pointed out to me, and I was working on the book, that in World War II, which would have been his vintage, there were stories about how the US soldiers could get through to informants by giving them silk stockings, because silk was a very precious commodity because of the parachutes. And everybody wanted to have silk stockings to give to their girlfriends. So maybe he had this big store of silk stockings for fearing that there was going to be some big war and he was going to use them to earn favors. But that's one of the most plausible explanations. I put that in the book. That was about the only thing I could come up with on why he had all those silk stockings. Anyway, he's a weird guy, right? Now, but Anne Vries, who had her dog killed by him, thought that because she did not lash out at him, she felt very sorry for him. She thought he was a troubled man. Of course, killing her dog made her angry, but she was more worried about him. And we think that's one of the proximate reasons. I came up with 6 proximate reasons on why he gave the money. One was to assuage his guilty conscience, because he knew that Anne was the treasurer of the food bank and that would impress her. And when I told Anne, because I got to talk to her, she died shortly after I talked to her back in 2010, what I was doing and what I'd learned. And when she heard that Earl Vick had given $335,000, his whole estate, the food bank, she broke down and wept. She was that moved. So he was a very strange guy. And Alan told me all these stories about him. And Alan said that he helped Earl write his will, but he didn't know who the beneficiary was until the will was read. And he said there were no indications at all. And he talked to Earl a lot about Earl deciding to give everything to the food bank.
Question?
Yes.
Question, Ron. When was that he wrote the will? I maybe missed it.
He died in December of '96, shoveling snow off his sidewalk. Yeah. He wrote the will in 1994, 2 years before he died.
Oh.
Isn't that amazing?
But no other contacts with you or the neighbor that would indicate?
No.
Okay. Wow.
I was not able to find a smoking gun. I said I came up with 6 proximate reasons on why he probably did it, but they're all guesses. And one of them was with Anne Vries trying to make it up to her for killing her dog. Jeez, what a guy, huh? What a guy. I walked all around the neighborhood and asked people about him, and there were very few people that knew anything about him because he was such a recluse. So, but
weird
blessing. Pardon me?
Oh, excuse me.
Okay.
I was just going to say, it sounds like a weird blessing.
Yeah, it was a weird blessing. That's well put. That's well put. So his money led to the building of our permanent home on 35th and Morgan Street, which opened in 2007. Isn't that an irony? But you know, Lester Yu he's the volunteer director. I think he has some other title now, but he's one of the managers at the food bank, and Lester's an incredible guy. And he does tours of the food bank, and he likes to tell the story about Earl Vick. You know, he says, it's never too late in your life to do something good. That's the lesson of Earl Vick. Isn't that good? I like that. So anyway, used his money, and it was seed money. And of course, it was a huge project, multi-million-dollar project, where we ended up putting low-cost housing on top of the food bank, turned it into a community center. I mean, it's a spectacular facility serving our community. And there were 4 people that made this all possible. And if you know any of these people, you're a very lucky person if you know these people. Fran, I've mentioned to you already, is the executive director, but Christy and Karen and Barb are unbelievable human beings. In the book, I use a description that the biography of the biographer of Justice, Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connell, the words that that biographer uses to describe her, what a pioneer she was, to describe these 3 people. I just think very, very highly of them. If they're here tonight, or that, I'm sure they're embarrassed because they're such modest people, but they worked and worked and worked on this food bank, which was, there were all kinds of problems in moving from that 330,000 donation in 97 to the actual opening of the building in 2007. There were so many snags, so many difficulties. And I try to tell some of those in the book, and some of them are prologues. They're just tangled messes. And these 3 people sorted them all out, working full time and donating hours. So if you know these people, you should just thank them one more time, because today we're able to feed thousands of people a week because of these people, these four women. Yes.
A member of the audience, Pete Spalding, comments that those women are still active in the community.
Way to go, Pete. I'm glad you're here. Pete's the former president of the West Seattle Food Bank Board. Great guy. Thanks, Pete, for reminding us of that. They're all around. You can, if you don't know them, you can get to know them. They're really wonderful people, wonderful people. So I call it the sine qua non, without which not. This food bank would not be here without these 4 people. It's just as clear as a bell to me. And so in the book, I kind of go out on a limb and I call them the 4 horsemen of Notre Dame. You know, there are these famous football players that just won all these games back in the 20s and 30s. They were famous, the 4 horsemen of Notre Dame. I know it's not politically correct to say that about these 4 wonderful people, but they remind me of the success and the effort with their work on the food bank. So that's why I call them that in the book. Wonderful, wonderful people. And then we have that 4th question, but there was another miracle that had to happen first. We had the money, but we didn't have a location. We looked at different locations. We looked at, remember I said we wanted to buy the Ed and Mary North building and it wasn't for sale. Then right across the street, there was a grocery store, which has now turned into, I think, the West Seattle Brewery. We thought that would be a good place. It's right in our, so, we wouldn't have trouble with people wondering where the food bank went. We'd still be in the same location, virtually. And that wasn't available. It was much too expensive. And then we looked at other places and we were shocked by how expensive places were. I mean, we even went down to White Center and looked at some dilapidated storefront properties that were selling for $1 million. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, Kathleen Brazelton, who now is Hood, her last name's now Hood, lives in Kent. Kathleen Brazelton was on the board. She was a realtor. And she said, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I can find a piece of property. He said, we've been looking. Remember, it was one for 10 years. And so she just put her thinking hat on and drove around West Seattle. And she remembered this empty lot. Some of you old timers here tonight maybe remember the empty lot on the corner of 35th and Morgan. It would have been on the southeast corner. And the rails were up, but the whatever property was there, completely gone, and the foundation was still there, but the handrails were up on the sidewalk. And it had been empty for 40 years. Now, no big property in West Seattle stays empty for 40 years. So what's the story behind that? Now, when we find, so Kathleen said that wasn't even on the market. That property wasn't even on the market, and she couldn't find the owner. You know, she had all her real estate skills. She couldn't find the owner. It wasn't on the market. So you know what she did? She walked around the neighborhood, knocking on people's doors, asking, do you know who owns this piece of property? And somebody told them about the Grenkoviches. Now, they were Russian immigrants who were shoemakers, who had a little business, but it was really viable on Del Ridge Avenue for years. And they owned the property. And they were willing to sell it to us for a fraction of the market value. Why were they? When I worked on the book, they were both alive. I talked to their son, Robert, very briefly, and he said they didn't want to talk about it. So I walked around the neighborhood. I took Kathleen Brazelton, and I talked around the neighborhood, and I said, what can you tell me about this piece of property? You know anything about it? Well, guess what? In 1972, there was an apartment on that lot. And in the middle of the night, it exploded in an inferno. And it burned to the ground. And here's a picture from the Seattle Times of the firemen trying to put out the fire. And so then they said it has something to do with the fire. So I need to learn more about that. And what I found out was that in the fire, two people that were burned up, a brother and a sister, a brother and a sister, Lucille Ruth Hoyt and Leo B. Reap. There was a little baby in the apartment that the firemen were able to rescue. So the only two people that died were Lucille and Leo. And what the neighbors told me was that the Grenkoviches, it broke their heart that their property burned and killed two people. And they thought that the property was haunted. And they didn't know what to do with it. They were afraid to sell it to anybody, because this is the urban legend. And I've never been able to confirm any of this, but I tell this what I learned, what the urban legend was in the neighborhood. And the reason why they sat on that piece of property for 40 years was they couldn't in good conscience sell it to anybody or use it for anything, because they believed it was haunted because two people had died there. So what I say in the book is that Lucille and Leo's death were sacrificial deaths that held that property for us until we could build a food bank on it. Because when they learned that the food bank wanted it, it laundered the property for them. It overcame the bad tragedy of the deaths with such a good eleemosynary use of helping needy people. And that's why they sold it well below the asking, well below the assessed value, because this solved their problem. They've been waiting for 40 years to know what to do with it. And it was served up to them in one day when Kathleen Brazelton showed up and said, we want to buy it. So on February 17th of every year, I thank God for Lucille and Leo, even though they didn't know what they were doing when they died, did they? Sometimes that happens. People do something good and they didn't have it in mind at all. A bad thing happens to them and something good comes out of it. because as far as we could tell at the time when we were looking for property, there was no property available for us. So when this happened, we thought we had hit the jackpot, and we hadn't. Because we soon found out that if we built the food bank on that piece of property and had low-cost housing up on top of it to make it suitable for city, county, and state grants to enable us to pay them multi-million dollars to build the facility, we would need more low-cost housing above it than we had room for. So our big plans, I mean, I don't know how many times our balloon was deflated and we just sat around wringing our hands. How can we get so close? And it's not going to happen. Well, there was one possibility to make it happen, and that was to buy the property at the tip of that lot, which would fill out the corner, that southeast corner. But there was a piece of property sitting on it, wonderful teriyaki, that had been boarded up for a while. It was out of business. But when the owners found out that we needed it, they were going to get the highest price they could. And that's when our partners came in, and a person named Philip and I with DNDA that many of you know about, Delridge Neighborhood Development Association, that we were teamed up with when we were building the food bank, because there were two other pieces of property, Youngstown and then the Croft Place apartments. All three of these were going up together, and we raised money in West Seattle for all three of them simultaneously. That's another part of the story that I haven't really developed fully here in this presentation. But Philip and I really worked hard on trying to negotiate a fair price, and it looked like it wasn't going to happen, wasn't going to happen, and then all of a sudden it happened. So we made it. We can now build. But then we got our balloon deflated again, because we discovered that prior to Wonderful Teriyaki being there, there was a Texaco gas station there, and the land was contaminated. So the reclamation of the land was cost prohibitive. And if I'm not mistaken, it was Fran, I think, that worked hard with, I think it was Chevron Oil at the time that had that property. It was some other big gas company. But anyway, we were really pressing them to do the reclamation of the land as a gift to us, because it was too expensive. And it looked like nothing was going to happen. Nothing was going to happen. The whole damn thing was dead in the water again. It was dead in the water again. And then out of the blue, they did it. And it started rolling. So after overcoming the final delays in fundraising, construction of the food bank finally came together, and we opened it the first week of May 2007. And at the end of the book, I tell the story about this movie. I don't know if you've seen this movie, Hidden in America, with the Bridges brothers are in it. Bo and Jeff are in it, as well as my little icon covers the McDermott, yeah. Great acting. It's a great film about hunger in America among the children. So at the end of the book, I say, so the challenge for all of us is, on any given night, up to 5 million children in America go to bed hungry. How many of us will wake up in the morning and think about solutions? So I didn't want this to be an arid history book. It's a history of the food bank, and our mission is to feed people. So I was going to, and I'm a preacher, damn it. So I was going to hit them up at the end and say, look it, if you're moved by this story, then help the food bank. And currently, the food bank is doing quite well. The merger with the West Seattle Helpline happened right before the pandemic hit last year, and we're going great guns. There is the Washington State Secretary of State Certificate of Merger on February 28th. when the helpline and the food bank came together. So now the helpline is one of the programs of the West Seattle Food Bank, where we also help people not just with food, but through the helpline, we're able to help with rent assistance and utility bills, as well as other, but those are the major things that we do. Plus there's a clothing bank associated with it. So, so are we some of those who wake up looking for solutions to the problem of hunger in America? And if we are, then help out the West Seattle Food Bank today with your donations of food, time, and money. Be one of the people who make a difference. Many people doing a little adds up to a lot. So in my history book, I tell a joke about what does it take to be a bestseller? And I was surprised to find out that if you sell 40,000 copies of your book, it's a bestseller. So I said, okay, now West Seattle has about 100,000 people. So the book came out in October of 2013. So in the book at the end, I say, now if everybody in West Seattle were to buy a copy to give away and have it under the Christmas trees or the Hanukkah candles or whatever, Kwanzaa in December, the holidays in December, everybody were to give a book away, we could turn it in, just half of the people in West Seattle, we could turn it into a bestseller. And even though the book is produced for about $6, but we've attached a $30 cost to it on the barcode because it's a fundraiser. The idea is to give $30 to the food bank for the 30 years, and then you get a book thrown in. So it's not like you're really buying the book, you're making a donation to the food bank. So I talked to Michael and Dorothy about this, and they said, yeah, you can go out and hit them up at the end. So I'm hitting you all up at the end. If you don't have the food bank book, get it for yourself. And if you do have the food bank book, buy another one and give it to a friend, because all the money goes to the food bank to help us take care of our neighbors in need. So
All
there's
right,
the book.
I have a couple.
There's the book.
I have a couple
Okay.
questions for you.
Okay. All right. We'll take questions. Then I'll do a summary of my presentation with the pictures that are on the cover. The pictures on the cover of the book summarize the whole book. Okay, Dorothy.
Well, someone has asked you to tell about the shopping store model instead of the bags of food.
Well, this is another wonderful thing that the food bank is so full of wonderful stories about the here and the now, how we actually help our clients. I mean, you could go on and on and on about it. As you know, my story here is about the past. But one of the things that's happened in the last couple of years is that we really wanted, and we've always been concerned about this and really didn't know what to do. I think Pete Spalding was involved in this when we saw what was going on up at the University District Food Bank, where the distribution of food was done differently. Rather than hanging out bags of food, they created a grocery store environment where the clients would come in with carts and go around and pick things off shelves. And when Pete took his crew up there from the board and the staff and looked at it, they all said, yes, this is what we got to do. So then they talked to some donors, and the donors put up the money to get the shelves in there and to set the whole thing up. And now we have the grocery store model. And what we've discovered is that there were clients for a long time who would have liked to have come to the food bank, but didn't feel welcome for all the other welcoming things that we did. But when they saw that this way of distribution was now provided, they came. So it's enabled us to serve our neighbors all the more. So it is a spectacular new part of the service that the food bank provides for our community. Thanks for bringing that up, whoever did. Okay.
And connected to that, someone is asking, Bob is, how do you know that the people receiving food are really needy?
Yeah, there was a joke about the food bank when it started back in the 80s, because, we had the other food bank. And so the other food bank, the one that was started in 1970, was called the Democrat Food Bank. And then our food bank was called the Republican Food Bank. And I think those epithets were unfair, but what they were about was that the food bank that started in 1970 up in High Point on Holly Street, they had no client cards, they had no way of tracking food or anything. They just gave away as the food came in, and there was very little record keeping. Whereas the Junction Food Bank, under Paul and Lois's direction, always thought it was important to have client cards. So we learn about our clients, and we try and help them, what we can do. And we're so happy now that we have a fuller cooperation with the West Seattle Helpline, that we can help them with other concerns besides their food insecurity. But that enables us to know that our food is going to a good cause with each one of our clients. Now, there's still ways that it can go south, but we feel we've done due diligence without being unwelcoming. We want to welcome our clients, but we also want to do due diligence. And I think our food bank has figured out a way to do that with the client cards. So when people come, they always register. And so that's our attempt to make sure that they truly have a need and that we're helping them.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
About the help tumor, about the helpline. Are they housed with you there?
Yes. Now the helpline started in '89. I was one of the founders of the helpline and was on that board the whole time that it existed until it merged last year with the food bank. And when the food bank building opened up, we were one of the anchor tenants, it was called, because the food bank facility here on the 35th Street side has office space up there for other human services. And the food bank moved in there in 2007 when the building opened. So the helpline had been there as an independent nonprofit agency, albeit an anchor tenant in the community resource section there. And so, but it was only last year when the two nonprofits merged officially. So yes, that's a long answer to your question. The helpline is actually in the food bank building.
Thank you. And one more question back, and then I'll let you go back to summarize your book. But Pete is asking, are the books more valuable if you personally autograph it? And how can we do that?
Well, Pete, you know they're more valuable if I write my name in them. You know, I don't know, just bring it by the church. No, they're not more valuable. It's it's all the wonderful pictures that Sonia worked on, and all the wonderful stories that I was able to collect, and that's what makes the book valuable. But I'd be happy to sign it. And if because of the lockdown, you know, our problems with COVID-19 now, you can buy the book and then hold on to it, and maybe one day again we will be able to gather together and see each other face to face, and I'd be happy to sign your book.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I have one more comment.
Oh,
Would
yeah.
you like to go back to your pictures first or hear the comment first?
I'll take the comment.
It is, and it comes from a friend of yours. Clay is asking. He says, Ron, your passion and commitment are clearly unparalleled. Running a church is a full-time job in itself, and serving as a longtime leader and champion of the food bank is beyond the call, not to mention writing a book about it. Given all of that, out of all the extracurricular causes out there, why did you choose food as your cause?
Well, I try to talk about that. By the way, I love Clay. He's a good friend. I just think Clay's the greatest guy, and his wife Meg, they're wonderful people. At any rate, you know, I have a religious commitment to feeding the hungry. So it's kind of an occupational hazard of Christians that we worry about people that don't have food to eat. We worry about people that don't have medical care, like the Good Samaritan story. We worry about people that don't have a place to live, to find shelter. So it comes from a religious motivation. But boy, talking about being a lucky duck, I mean, you know, you can have that religious motivation and not have any civic outlet, right?
Right.
And I got this unbelievable civic outlet, the West Seattle Food Bank, that can help me fulfill my my religious yearnings. So I owe a lot to the food bank. Thank you, Clay. I'm glad you're here tonight. And, you know, Clay's all over my book because I'm quoting his work, because he kept track of all of this development of the food bank in the pages of the West Seattle Herald when he was the past editor of the West Seattle Herald. So you'll see his name crop up here and there. And plus his great book on the West Side Story is also in my book. That was a very important resource for me to try to locate the food bank history in the broader history of West Seattle. Okay, so now I got the pictures on the cover. And again, I want to thank Sonia Clemente for this. She designed this cover. I would talk to her about the stories before I wrote them down, and she'd say, "Ron, you got to fix that story. It just doesn't come across." And so she was very helpful in writing the book. I told her, I think when I autographed her copy of the book, I told her she was the ghostwriter of the book, because I would go through these stories with her and she would help me form them in a way that got the point across. So anyway, she came up with this cover and I just love it. So we have 6 photos on here. We got Paul and Lois at the top. They're the founders. And then they are very, very important people, right? Very, very important people. If they hadn't been there, and it was all lucky that they were there, right? It was all lucky that they came out from South Dakota and settled in West Seattle, right? And it was lucky that Lois went down to work at Floyd Mankey's distribution. And it was lucky that she was, you know, I'm not going to repeat the story. So anyway, they're very important. And then we have Earl Vick in all of his childhood splendor. And there's Alan Lesma, who was the executor of the will. And there's some great stories about him, how he got Earl Vick to warm up to him. He got Earl Vick to look him in the eye. You know, Earl Vick would only look at people's shoes, and he did it through Christmas cookies in the office, because Al was a architect down in the Terminal 1 building. And Earl was, he'd come in there and clean the office. And sometimes Al would be there late at night, and he would talk to him, and Earl would never talk to him. So he warmed up, he figured he could warm him up with cookies. And I said the story about cookies. And that's how they became friends. That's how he got on. And I think that's how he became the executor of the will. And I think he's one of the proximate reasons on why the food bank was involved. And then we have Ed and Mary North. Can't say enough about them. 20 years we were at their location. 20 years. Very, very important part of the story. The vast majority of the food bank story is in their property. And they're on the cover. And then there at the bottom is Anne Vries with her boy, whose dog was killed by Earl Vick, and her husband. And unfortunately, Anne passed away. And you know, Anne passed away before the book was published. She never saw it. But remember, I told the story when I told her that I was working on it, and that Earl had given all this money. She just wept. Remember? So I'm glad she at least knew that part of it, but she never got a chance to see the book. But there she is on the cover. All these people contributed in very important ways. So that today, with the wonderful donations of the West Seattle community, we're able to help our neighbors in need. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I hope that this story inspires you not only to love West Seattle, it's an interesting part of our story, but also to redouble your efforts in helping our neighbors.
Ron, it was a very compelling presentation, and I love your sense of humor and the sense of history and the people that you honor. And we honor you for all of that work, a lot of years and a lot of work, and for presenting this evening. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And maybe it'd be good to, in closing, since this is sponsored by the West Seattle Historical Society, I got this great quote from George Santayana, the Harvard philosopher from 100 years ago, where he says, "History is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who weren't there." So I quote that in the book, and I say, I don't know, they think it's apocrypha that Santayana never said that, but it's attributed to him. And so I thank everybody that helped me work on the book to try to make it more accurate than that.
Really enjoyed it, Ron. I'm glad to have met you this way, and I'm going to look for $30. and then I'll come and get your autograph.
Okay, good for you. Good for you.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you
Thank
again,
you,
Ron, as
Ron.
well. I want to thank you on behalf of the Historical Society and just echo Dora Faye's comments that was just a really moving and inspiring presentation, and we're truly grateful to you. And again, thanks to everybody that joined us. Please support the food bank. They're clearly doing amazing work, and we're proud to host Ron and be able to share their story with you this evening. So thank you again for your support. I should note as well, the Historical Society is, the Log House Museum is currently closed, but we're still a resource to you as well. Please feel free to check out our website for updates about additional programs and experiences. We'll be posting updates about our forthcoming reopening plans too. So be sure to keep an eye on our website and on our social media accounts. And of course, again, thank you for your support. We'll be looking forward to seeing you next month. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good evening.
Thank you everyone for
Thank you,
coming.
Michael. Ron, your audience is thanking you for a really fun and informative presentation.
I'm so
Marcy
glad you could all
Johnson.
be here. I'm so glad you could all be here.
And thank you all again from me for being here. Tune in next month, second Thursday. It will be another good one. Good night.
Good night,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone.
It was great. Another great evening.
That was a great presentation. He did a great job. That was fantastic.
Oh yeah, I think he's gone. He's left us, but I've never met him before, and I was going to ask a couple more details. He obviously was with the food bank for a long time. The information that he gave me and so forth is that he started in '96, but I'm based on what he said, he's been involved with the helpline and all that a lot longer than that. But I believe, I mean, I bet he believes too. I don't know where you're at spiritually, Michael, but he keeps saying all this is all luck, and he knows better than that. And, call it the universe or whatever, but he has been a long time watching out for the poor and the needy and the hungry in West Seattle. And I'm glad we were able to honor him this time and give that opportunity to the audience. And I'm serious about it. I don't know if the Historical Society can afford that book, but I want to get it because, like you said, he refers to Clay and the book and the journalism that Clay did and the history. And as I've learned to love West Seattle since I've been here too. Pretty cool.
Absolutely. It's a great opportunity for us. And I really appreciate your coordinating the event, as always, Dora Faye, and finding such a profound and inspiring speaker. And I think, for us to be able to host a speaker like Ron with such an important and relevant message about something that really does impact our community on a lived level, on a day-to-day level, it's just a great opportunity.